Jason was suspended over a trifle, but everyone knew it was punishment for speaking a truth he dared to voice. The principal had no idea that Jason's father was a man with influence over the school. Their class shook everyone around them, and what followed would shock even the most hardened souls. But let's start from the very beginning. Jason Reed, a black high school senior, was well known at school for his dedication to social justice. He led the school's social rights club and frequently delivered speeches at assemblies. His latest address, filled with calls for equality and recounting instances of discrimination at school, sparked a strong reaction. Many students admired his courage, applauding him, and some even approached him after the assembly to express their support. However, the administration, under the newly appointed white principal, Mr. Wilson, was clearly not pleased. Wilson, recently appointed, was known for his strict approach to discipline and demanded absolute adherence to school rules. From the start, his attitude toward Jason was wary, as Jason wasn't afraid to address controversial issues. When Jason exited the auditorium after his speech, Wilson's disapproving gaze followed him, as if he saw a personal adversary in him. The next day, in his hurry to get to class, Jason accidentally left a water bottle in the hallway. For most, this would have been a minor oversight, but Wilson, noticing it, seized the opportunity to his advantage. Without explanation, he summoned Jason to his office. When Jason entered, the principal was already sitting at his desk with a cold expression. "Mr. Reed, it seems you believe the rules don't apply to you," Wilson began without even a greeting. "Leaving a bottle in the hallway poses a safety hazard to other students. We cannot allow such carelessness." Jason tried to explain that it was an innocent mistake, responding, "Mr. Wilson, it was just a bottle. I forgot it in a rush. I didn't think it would be an issue." But Wilson cut him off. "This school is a place of order and discipline, not a stage for defiance. Perhaps a temporary suspension will teach you to respect the rules." Jason was stunned. He was handed the suspension order without a chance to explain himself. Leaving the office, Jason struggled to contain his anger and frustration, realizing the bottle wasn't the issue. It was that he was seen as a threat to Wilson's control. Rumors of his suspension spread rapidly across the school. Students discussed the incident in hallways, between classes, and in group chats. Outraged by the unfair decision, some even started a petition in support of Jason. Friends and other students began to publicly back him, but the administration's pressure on them grew with every passing hour. Jason's classmate Sarah, known for her high grades and community involvement, stood up for him, declaring, "Jason did nothing wrong. He's just speaking the truth and fighting for us. This suspension is the principal's revenge." But Wilson's threats intensified, warning that any open support for Jason could lead to similar punishments. Thus, Jason's forgotten water bottle became the center of a conflict, dividing the school into two camps. Returning home, Jason was seething with anger and frustration. He felt humiliated, and a storm of indignation raged inside him over the unjust punishment. Seeing his son at the door, Jason's father, Mr. Reed, instantly sensed something was wrong. Jason, usually upbeat and full of energy, looked defeated and lost. Mr. Reed knew his son was dealing with something serious, but he refrained from questioning him, giving him time to cool down. Later that evening, Jason told his father everything. He described how Principal Wilson had latched onto a minor mistake and used it as a pretext for suspension. Mr. Reed listened attentively, not interrupting once, though his expression grew more serious. Jason was unaware of his father's significant role on the school board and substantial financial contributions to the district. Mr. Reed had considerable influence and status, but he never flaunted this before his son, preferring to remain in the background. But this situation called for action. After hearing his son's story, Mr. Reed placed a hand on Jason's shoulder and said, "You did the right thing by speaking up, Jason. We're behind you, and I'm proud of your courage. Tomorrow, we'll address this." However, he chose not to reveal his authority and decided to give Wilson a chance to resolve the situation peacefully. It was important to see how the principal would respond to an attempt at dialogue and determine if he genuinely intended to address the issue. Meanwhile, news of Jason's suspension spread quickly across social media. Students voiced their support for justice, sharing posts in solidarity with Jason and expressing dissatisfaction with the principal's decision. Parents began to hear about the situation, sparking heated discussions in their group chats. The outrage grew, and soon the matter attracted local community attention. People started questioning why an active, intelligent teenager was being punished for a simple mistake, and many suspected bias and personal animosity from the principal. The next morning, Mr. Reed arrived at the school, prepared to meet the principal in person. Walking through the halls, he overheard students whispering and murmuring. Passing by the auditorium, he noticed a group of students distributing flyers in support of Jason. Determination and hope for justice were evident in their eyes. When Mr. Reed entered Wilson's office, the principal greeted him with little respect, assuming he was an ordinary parent. "Your son, Jason," Wilson began with a cold smile, "earned his suspension. He disrupts order and undermines discipline. We can't have students acting as they please." Mr. Reed listened intently, but his expression showed mounting dissatisfaction. He maintained his composure, yet he was beginning to question whether Wilson understood his responsibilities. After one particularly biting remark from Wilson, Mr. Reed interrupted. "Mr. Wilson, perhaps you're unaware, but I'm a member of the school board and an investor in this district. I've put considerable time and resources into the development of this school. As someone with direct influence over school policy, I'm extremely concerned about your approach." Wilson paled, realizing he had severely misjudged the person he was speaking to. The revelation that Mr. Reed was a board member and major investor in the school district stunned Wilson. Trying to save face, he hastily spoke up. "Mr. Reed, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. We always aim to maintain discipline, and in your son's case, we—" But Mr. Reed interrupted him. "Jason did nothing to warrant such punishment. He was expressing his opinion, which I thought was encouraged in a school I support." Wilson tried to defend his actions, arguing that Jason's behavior could negatively influence other students, but his words grew increasingly uncertain. With thinly veiled displeasure, Mr. Reed replied, "It seems you fear those who challenge your authority, and perhaps, to you, that's more troubling than real issues. You chose to punish my son not for his actions, but for his ideas." Meanwhile, the school community outside the principal's office was becoming increasingly vocal. Learning of Mr. Reed's visit, students held a small demonstration outside the administrative offices, holding signs calling for Jason's reinstatement and justice. Sarah and his other friends waited anxiously at the door, encouraging each other. Rumors of Mr. Reed's support for Jason quickly spread, and soon parents joined the students in their demands. Social media buzzed with photos and posts about Jason's situation, gathering thousands of likes and comments. People began writing letters to the school board, calling for a review of the suspension. It became a public protest, and Wilson realized he had lost control. Feeling the mounting pressure, the principal attempted to placate Mr. Reed, suggesting a reduction in the suspension or merely issuing a warning. But Mr. Reed, seeing through his intentions, replied, "No, my son should not be punished for trying to make this school better. You need to apologize and drop all charges against him." Realizing he had been defeated, Wilson grudgingly agreed to Mr. Reed's conditions. He tried to maintain some dignity, but his face revealed clear humiliation. Exiting his office, he acknowledged that the punishment was rescinded and that he would personally apologize to Jason in front of the class. Word of Wilson's concession quickly spread, and the crowd outside erupted into applause. Watching the reaction, Jason felt the support of not only his family, but also everyone around him. The next day, Mr. Wilson gathered all the students in the auditorium to publicly apologize to Jason. The room was packed. Students, teachers, parents, and even school board members had come to witness the principal's admission of his mistake. Jason stood on stage next to his father as Wilson, visibly nervous, approached the microphone. He began with a stiff, formal statement, trying to keep his dignity, but under the intense gaze of the audience, he was forced to admit that his decision to suspend Jason had been hasty and unfair. "I apologize to Jason and the entire school for my poor judgment," he said with difficulty, facing stares filled with displeasure. It seemed that every glance met him with disapproval or disappointment. This was a painful moment, He was experiencing accountability for the first time. Jason, receiving the long-awaited apology, felt that his struggle had not been in vain. He looked at Wilson and, despite his feelings, accepted the apology with dignity. He understood that his actions had taught a lesson not only to the administration, but to all the students as well. Meanwhile, the incident gained wide attention in local news and social media. Inspired by the story, journalists wrote about Jason and his courage. Many saw him as a symbol of the fight for justice and equality, and the school became an example of how a student community could stand up for its rights. In response to the public outcry, the school board decided to launch an investigation to prevent similar situations in the future. They planned to introduce a program for principals and teachers to combat bias and develop skills for fair communication with students. The school also promised to create a student rights committee to ensure such incidents wouldn't go ignored. Jason, now a symbol of change, received invitations to speak at other schools in the district to share his experience. He proudly accepted, feeling that his voice could inspire others. As for Wilson, who remained in his position but under strict oversight, he had to learn to find common ground with students, listen to them, and most challenging of all, respect their opinions. Jason's story did not end with his personal victory. It led to real changes at school and inspired an entire community to stand up for justice.